Okay, welcome everyone. Good evening. I'm Meagan Fastuca. I'm an environmental specialist with the town of North Hempstead, and I work in our Department of Planning and Environmental Protection on sustainability projects like pollinator conservation and climate change actions. And I would also like to introduce Bonnie Klein, who is the town's horticulturist, and Bonnie and I will jointly be giving tonight's workshop. So we want to thank you all so much for joining us this evening. Happy spring, everyone, even though kind of doesn't feel like it, even a little chilly still. So first, Bonnie, would you like to tell everyone about yourself a little bit?
Sure. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being with us. I'm Bonnie Klein. I'm the horticulturist town of North Hempstead, and I get to work out of the beautiful Clark Botanic Garden every day, besides working for the town and other areas, in parks and in other areas of the town. So thank you, and hopefully we learned some things today.
Thanks, Bonnie. So before we start, I want to let everyone know that if you have any questions for us during the presentation, please put them into the Q&A section. You can put them in at any time during the presentation, and then we'll answer them at the conclusion. So we're not going to be monitoring the chat for any questions. So please make sure if you do have questions or comments, you put them into the Q&A. And also we are recording. You probably heard the thing in the beginning saying that it was recording. So we're recording the workshop and it's going to be posted on the town's website. So you don't have to, take copious notes. Everything will be there. You can watch it again if you need to, or watch certain parts to catch anything you might have missed. All right, so now we'll get started. Tonight's workshop is on how we can maintain our landscapes to benefit both people and wildlife. So why should we landscape for wildlife in mind? One reason is that due to development, farming, pollution, climate change, invasive species, wildlife has lost much of its habitat, and what is left now is very fragmented, as you can see from this picture. Let me get my little pointer here. Another reason is that by providing resources for wildlife, we use more natural practices that lower our inputs of things like pesticides, fertilizers, water, as well as lowering whatever maintenance we have to do. And yards that provide wildlife resources like native plants, nesting and water sources, and cover attract more biodiversity. So seeing wildlife like birds, butterflies, and bees in our yards provides humans with joy, relaxation, and stress relief. I know it does for me, at least. So how can we landscape with where we both benefit? So that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. So the main needs for wildlife are food, water, nesting habitat, or places to raise young, and cover or shelter. And then we also have our own needs for our landscapes, including food production. We want it to be beautiful, recreation and relaxation, stormwater management, and of course, attracting wildlife, and doing that all in as low of maintenance as we can, and low costs too. So first we'll discuss the need for food from our landscapes. So the food web starts with plants. They're the foundation of our ecosystem, and we obviously couldn't live without them. So we rely on plants for food, and we also grow them in our yards as crop plants, like in vegetable gardens, and we have fruit trees and things like that. So one way we can aid our food plants in a sustainable way is by creating and using compost, which provides nutrients and food for both plants and the soil organisms that live there. So now I'm going to pass it on to Bonnie, who's going to discuss home composting.
So composting is the breakdown of organic materials by decomposters with the use of oxygen to create a nutrient-rich soil amendment that we use in our yards and in our gardens. We use it all the time at Clark. You can see there are so many different types of decomposters, like bacteria, fungi, insects, snails. They're all in this picture. Centipedes, worms, they're all living in our soil. Benefits that we have from composting, it provides nutrients for plants and organisms living in the soil. It attracts earthworms and beneficial insects. It reduces waste that ends up in landfills, and combustion facilities, thereby reducing the greenhouse gas emissions from wasted foods. It reduces and eliminates the needs for fertilizers, because there's fertilizer in the compost, well, or nutrients in the compost, I should say. It can improve our soil texture, which is important. Regulates the pH of the soil, improving the ability of the plants to take in nutrients. Next slide. Compost systems. So there are a few different types of compost systems. Bins are an enclosed system and can be useful to save space and keep animals out. And some of those are tumblers. They are bins that consist of a cylindrical drum that spins, and it's easy to turn and to mix it. And that's pretty easy to use. And then there are plastic and metal bins that can make our own, you can make it on your own by drilling holes. You can drill holes in a garbage pail and in the sides and the bottom and on the lid. And you can use your own old garbage pails as a composter. And then there are large piles. This is handling large volumes of waste. The temperatures may get hotter than in a small bin, so materials can break down faster. It may be harder to turn. So if you don't have like a big machine to turn it, it might be harder because they're very large piles. So a compost crank is helpful sometimes with these. It can be sucked straight into the pile. You can twist it and then pull it up to mix the compost without using a pitchfork. And then there's a bokashi fermentation. Am I pronouncing that right? I think so. Bokashi fermentation.
That's how I pronounce it. So
okay. And this method, it doesn't use oxygen, and it works by putting food scraps in a bucket, and you can keep them inside. So it would be helpful for those who don't have space outdoors. For more information on the bokashi method, it's on this slide from Rewild, Long Island. There's a link on this slide, so you can go back and look up that link. Next. So some of the materials, just to explain to you, are going into the compost, because a lot of people get confused about this. Compost needs a balance of carbons and nitrogen-rich material. All organic matter contains these elements. Carbon-rich materials are known as the browns, and the nitrogen-rich are known as greens. So if you look at the picture right on the screen, you can see the difference, which ones are the browns and which ones are the greens. So a good rule of thumb is to add 3 parts of the browns to every 1 part of the green. And if you add too many greens, there'll be too much nitrogen. And that's when it makes ammonia and the compost starts to smell and become slimy. So sometimes people do ask, how come it smells bad? And that's because there's too many greens, too much maybe turf cuttings or grass cuttings. It becomes a little slimy. So you want to add a little more brown to counteract that. Now, if you add too many browns, the organisms will slow down and the temperature will be too low, making the decomposition happen much slower. So then you have to add more greens to counteract that. We want to say do not add any meat, fish, or dairy, because you can cause insects and animals can be attracted to it because it's the smell of that. And in small piles or bins, they don't break down well. So meat, fish, and dairy, you should not add. You should not add colored paper like magazines. Ink can be toxic. And you shouldn't add pet waste from cats or dogs. They can have pathogens. And do not add weeds. Plants can still go to seed. If it doesn't get hot enough to kill those seeds, and many weed seeds just keep persisting, so do not add weeds. Now, add soil to inoculate your compost. When you first start your compost, soil has nutrients and organisms in it. So if you add soil to your compost to inoculate it, take a scoop from your yard, add it to your compost, and that adds all the microbes that are already in your soil to get processed. Break up materials before adding them. When you break them up into pieces, it increases the surface area and makes them more available to be broken down by the decomposers. And add oxygen. Decomposers need this as the compost works aerobically with oxygen by mixing, turning the compost or adding bulking agents like wood chips or pine cones. You're turning it. and that adds oxygen to it, and that's what it needs. Also, timing, it can take anywhere from a few weeks to a year or more to produce compost, depending upon all the factors like how small the material is, what type of material you're using, how often it's being turned, the temperature, the moisture content. So what a lot of times people will say, how long is it going to take? Well, it really depends on all these different factors. And then you can work compost into your soil, and it can also be used to top dress lawns or expose soil. I use it to top dress my lawns once in the spring and once in the fall. I just top dress my lawns with old compost to keep the lawns healthy.
Great,
Okay,
thanks, Bonnie.
you're welcome.
So now we will talk about plants as food for wildlife. So plants are equally as important for them. They're the drivers of the food web, as we said before, and you can see from this little food web diagram I have. Wildlife like squirrels, birds, insects either directly eat the plants or are predators of those that do. And they really utilize all parts of the plants. There's things that eat the leaves, they eat the stems, the bark, the roots, nectar and pollen, and etc. And 90% of insects that rely on plants can only survive on plants with which they evolved. So that brings me to the importance of native plants in our landscapes. So native plants are those that have lived and evolved over hundreds or even thousands of years in a particular region and are adapted to its climate. They provide nectar, pollen, seeds, leaves, and fruit that feed many types of wildlife. And because wildlife have evolved with these plants, they provide the proper nutrition and resources they need. And humans also benefit from native plants, as you can see from the graphic. They provide stormwater management. They provide pollinator habitat. So if we have plants in our yard that we need to pollinate it, they provide the habitat for them as well. They provide carbon dioxide absorption and storage, which helps to combat climate change. They help to reduce soil erosion as their root systems anchor the soil. They improve water quality by filtering out chemicals before entering the watershed. They reduce the heat island effect, provide shade, including cooling and insulating buildings. They act as storm buffers, and they also provide beautification. So there's many, many benefits of native plants. So I'm going to discuss some of them, including stormwater runoff absorption. So they do a great job at this, which has been quite increasing due to climate change and our big storms that we've been having recently. As you can see from the picture, lawn grasses have very short root systems. So you can see this Kentucky bluegrass has roots that are only a few inches deep, while native grasses like this Indian grass, big blue stem, and switchgrass, they have roots that are multiple feet deep. So they are able to make these voids in the soil and help water to absorb into it better. And native trees are also helpful in stormwater retention and absorption to buffer against storms. So native plants provide many human benefits, as I said. One of them is beauty. And they also produce edible crops. So the plants in the top row here are some of the beautiful plants that are native plants to our region. We have aromatic aster, columbine, purple coneflower, mountain laurel, and anise hyssop. They benefit us and they benefit wildlife as well. And then on the bottom, we have some great plants that produce edible fruit for humans and for wildlife as well. There's lowbush blueberry. This is serviceberry. I have one of these in my yard, and the berries are extremely tasty, but the birds love them too, so they're hard to get. There's native raspberries, like this flowering raspberry, which has beautiful flowers and then edible fruit. And then also strawberries too. There's wild strawberry. Other edible native plants include black huckleberry, pawpaw, and persimmon, but there are plenty more. So this slide is focused on, the top row of pictures are focused on different species of wildlife using native plants as food. So the first photo on the left, this is a monarch butterfly larva eating milkweed. Butterflies and moths have specific plants which are called host plants. These are the only plants that their larvae will eat. So for monarchs, it's milkweed species. There's different species of milkweed. This is one of them called common milkweed. If you know a black swallowtail butterfly, you might have had them in your yard eating your parsley or some other crops because they eat foods from the carrot family like dill. And then there's also they eat the native Alexanders. And then for other butterflies like skipper butterflies, they eat grasses and sedges. And there's every butterfly and moth has some type of host plant for their larvae. The ones that are most beneficial to the widest variety of moths and butterflies are oaks, cherries, and willow trees. So the second photo is a squirrel eating an acorn. I'm sure we've all seen that. The next one is goldfinches. They're these beautiful yellow birds, and they're often eating our purple coneflower seeds and any other kinds of coneflowers, like rudbeckias and things like that. This one is actually a male feeding its young, which is really cute. That was at Clark Botanic Garden. And then this one is a mockingbird, sorry, eating berries from a winterberry shrub. So these berries are actually not edible for us, but they're edible for the birds, and they're very beautiful in the winter. And then these pictures on the bottom are more focused on insects as food, since they are a very important food source in our yards. 96 of birds rely on insects to feed their young, even when, you know, like you see a cardinal, you think it just eats seeds, but most of the time birds are feeding their young with insects as well. So predatory insects and invertebrates that eat insects include dragonflies, damselflies, lady beetles, mantises, lacewings, ambush bugs, wasps, and spiders. And these animals are really important for pest control too. So the first photo here is actually a larva of what's called a hoverfly, which is actually the adults are pollinators, and you'll see some pictures of those later. And it's eating aphids, so helping us control the aphid population. The second photo is what's called a braconid wasp. It's a caterpillar, but these white things are the pupae of the wasps, which is, I know it's probably pretty gross to most people, but the wasp will lay the eggs in this caterpillar, which is a tomato hornworm, which is also a pest species. It's called a parasitoid because it will lay its eggs in the species, and then these wasps will grow up in the body of the larvae and will pupate and then become adults. So it kills its host, obviously, because I don't know who could live through that. Then we have a garter snake, which I'm sure everybody has seen in their yards or parks, eat a lot of insects. And then the last photo this is called the cicada killer wasp. You may have seen them out. They're very large. Most of the time you see the males, they seem very aggressive, but they can't sting you. But this is a female, and she has a giant cicada. She paralyzed it with her sting, and now she's carrying it into her nest to feed her larvae. So again, if you don't like cicadas, cicada killer wasps are great for controlling their populations. So some other insects also provide us many services like decomposition. You have dung beetles, flies, carrion beetles, best beetles. They all break down dung, dead organisms, and wood. So these are important things that we want gone from our yards. Helps prevent disease and gets rid of that dead material. And these will all be attracted to a landscape that has native plants. So now I'm going to pass it over to Bonnie, who's going to discuss some beneficial native trees to plant in our landscape.
Okay. Next, we're gonna talk about I think there's about 5 or 6 trees that are native, and they're beautiful. Some of my favorites. This one right here is the American holly, or Ilex opaca, and it only grows to about 25 to 30 feet tall. This takes full sun to part shade. It's narrow too. It only grows to maybe 15, 20 feet in width. Water, medium type water, doesn't like it too wet, doesn't like it too dry. It's best known for its bright red fruit on the female plants because this is a dioecious plant. There's male and female plants. So there has to be a male plant for it to go into flower. But usually has to be within, it could be in a neighbor's yard, it could be around the corner, it doesn't have to be right next to it. But it has spiny evergreen leaves. It's an evergreen plant, and it's really a favorite during holiday time. You can make nice wreaths out of these, take cuttings. But most important in the landscape, the birds love the fruit, and the genus attracts almost 100 species of the native Lepidoptera, which is our caterpillars. So American holly also needs acid, likes well-drained soils and protection from harsh winds. So that's a great plant to have. And actually outside of your, I have one outside of my back window so I can watch the birds feeding on the berries. This one I thought was a beautiful plant, American hophornbeam, Astraea virginiana. And this grows 25 to 40 feet in height. It always depends upon where you have it and how much space it has. But it's narrow. It's only 10 to 15 feet in width. Full sun to part shade. Water also, it takes medium to dry. The hophornbeam, it's very graceful tree. Horizontal drooping branches. Its flowers are like catkins and its fruit is like a nutlet. It's encased that it resembles, it's in a casing and it resembles that of hops. That's where our beer comes from, the hops. So fall, it has a yellowish color. Hophornbeam attracts birds, lots of finches, and 91 species of Lepidoptera. And it also has, its wood is very hard. Next favorite tree. This is our eastern redbud, or Cercis canadensis. You might see this planted as a street tree in a lot of areas. It's 20 to 30 feet in height. There's different varieties of this tree, but it's also native. It goes to 25 to 35 in width. It could get 35 feet in width. Full sun to part shade. It could be an understory tree as well. Eastern redbuds are just very popular for their early spring magenta-like flowers and rounded spreading form, has a rounded form. It does best in consistently moist but well-drained soil, so it won't do great when it dries out. Redbud appears in all of New York, north to Canada, and it is not native to Vermont, New Hampshire, or Maine, which is odd, but flowers develop into short pendulous brown seed pods. And the red buds attract birds and pollinators and 19 species of native Lepidoptera. And this can be used instead of our ornamental cherries. Our ornamental cherries are beautiful, but they get a lot of insects and diseases that take over those cherries. So eastern redbud, Cercis canadensis, it's a really great tree. Next, we have our eastern red cedar, or Juniperus virginiana, and this is a larger plant, a larger tree, 40 to 50 feet in height, 8 to 20 feet in width. Just this is a nice privacy screen, loves full sun. The eastern red cedar it's a needled evergreen, and it adapts to a wide varieties of soils and conditions, except for very, very wet areas. The bark has like a reddish brown, and it exfoliates. The female cedars produce these, if you can see them on the screen, the little reddish, I'm sorry, gray, green, berry-like cones, and the birds devour them. But these cedars offer benefits, other insects and animals as well. There's 91 species of native Lepidoptera that love this plant. When planted near shrubs and trees in the rose family, you could have cedar apple rust as a problem. So be careful of that. So plant one or the other, either your prunus, your roses, or the eastern red cedar. And use instead of a non-native juniper as a specimen in groups, or again for screening. Next. This is a beautiful plant, the pagoda dogwood. It's just underutilized. Pagoda dogwood, or Cornus alternifolia, 15 to 20 feet in height, nice small tree, 20 to 30 foot in width, full sun to part shade. The branches of this pagoda dogwood are whorled and spread horizontally. It provides like an unusual striking habit. It's creamy white, high fragrant flowers are in spring, and they develop into green fruit that turn red and then purple, and has attractive, really red stems. The fall foliage is reddish. And Michael Durr, who's a great horticulturist, notes that that these pagodas are really great in cool summer areas. And this is used instead of Kuza dogwood. This is a native instead of using a Kuza dogwood, which is non-native. This pagoda dogwood is very attractive. Next.
Thanks, Bonnie.
Oh, you're welcome.
All right, so now I'm going to talk about some ways we can incorporate native perennials into our yards by reducing lawn. So this is actually my house, or was my house. Before I decided to put in native plants, and now you can see the after. So I've replaced all the lawn. Obviously, you don't have to do that. You can start off by putting in a small garden, but I just wanted to get rid of it. I was sick of watering it. It would always just get dry, and I wanted to reduce my maintenance. So I put in lots of native plants. Some of them, I have a serviceberry tree in the front over here. I have spotted bee balm, which is these beautiful white flowers here. I have butterfly milkweed, this orange flower plant here. There's coreopsis. So I know it's hard to see all these different things, but mountain mint, purple coneflower. There's a lot of different plants in there, and I can talk more about it later if anybody is interested in learning more. But besides providing all the benefits to wildlife, I definitely reduced my maintenance. I reduced air and noise pollution since I don't have to mow, and I don't have to water these plants either, which is great. So, like I said, you don't have to replace your lawn all at once. And it doesn't even have to be all natives. The National Wildlife Federation recommends 50 to 70% native plants in our yards, and studies show that this will lead to a 50% increase in wildlife. So if you just half of your plants are native, then you're doing really good. So the town has also been encouraging residents to replace their lawn grass and put in native plants in their own yards through our native plant rebate program. We get funding for the past 3 years from the Nassau County Soil and Water Conservation District and offer residents rebates for creating these gardens. The past 3 years, almost 70 new native gardens have been installed in residences around the town. So these are just a few examples of some of the beautiful gardens planted through the program. We are hoping to have the program again this year, so keep a lookout for that. We'd probably be releasing it sometime in mid to late April. And then the town has also installed some native plant gardens in our own landscapes. So we have pictured Bushillo Park in Carl Place. This is Clark Botanic Garden in Albertson, Gary Park in Roslyn, Whitney Pond Park, and then Town Hall in Manhasset. So now I'd like to discuss pollinators. They're such an important part of helping plants reproduce, which is vital to our ecosystem, and we can do a lot to assist them in our landscapes. Hummingbirds and native insects, including bees, flies, butterflies, moths, beetles, and wasps, are all pollinators who play an essential role in pollinating a wide variety of flowering plants where we live. Some native pollinator species have suffered population declines over the last few decades. You have in this picture, this is the rusty patch bumblebee. Some of you may have heard of it because it's now listed as an endangered species. And then this is the monarch butterfly. The eastern monarch butterfly migratory population has declined by more than 80% over the past 2 decades, mostly due to habitat loss, pesticide use. This graph here shows the decline over the years. This is the population that overwinters in Mexico, and each year they determine how much space these monarchs take up. So you can see how much it's declined in the past 20 to 30 years. So we actually have a great diversity of pollinators here on Long Island. So in the next few slides, I'm going to introduce you to some that don't know of these pollinators that are found here on Long Island. I've taken all these pictures in the town's pollinator gardens and around the town's parks. So really just got to look around you and you see things that you probably never saw before. So bees, bees are probably and definitely actually known as the best pollinators. At least the females are, because they have many hairs on and other specialized structures to collect the pollen to feed their larvae, which means they transport it better when they go in between flowers. So most people, when they think of bees, they think of honeybees. Honeybees are not native to the United States. They were brought here from Europe as a cultivated species. And while they are very important livestock for our crops, we have a lot of amazing native bee species that we need to be helping in our own yards. So really over 85% of the native bee species that we have are solitary. They don't have a hive or a communal nest, and instead they either nest in the ground or in cavities like wood or plant stems. So first on the top left, this is a bicolored striped sweat bee. They nest in the ground. They're beautiful green color and they got stripes on their abdomen. And they collect pollen, if you can see from this picture, on their hind legs. Next, we have a lemon cuckoo bumblebee, which, as you can tell from the name, it's a cuckoo bee. So it's known as a brood parasite. So basically, females will invade a host bumblebee's nest, take control, forcing their worker bees to raise and take care of the offspring. So it's pretty mean, but they got to make a living too. Everyone gets exploited in the natural world. This is a two-spotted longhorn bee. They also nest in the ground, and you can see they have very long hairs that on their legs to collect the pollen. And they're named longhorn bees because the males have very long antennae. This is a female, so her antennae aren't that long. This is called Wilkes mining bee. Mining bees are often active in the very early spring, so they're either out now or should be coming out soon. And they're also active in the late fall, so they like the cooler temperatures, which is why it's so important that we have plants blooming in all seasons in our yard so we can accommodate these species that come out really early and stay around late. They're mining bees, so it makes sense that they would nest in the ground. This is a pure green sweat bee. It's beautiful metallic green color. If you didn't know bees were green, now you do. They nest in rotting wood and pre-existing cavities. This is called a type of nomad bee. It is a type of brood parasite. Another one, just like the cuckoo bee. So they look like wasps because they don't have any hairs to collect pollen because they don't need it because they're going to lay eggs in somebody else's nest anyway. This is a small carpenter bee. It's a metallic blue-green color. It's very small, and we use its mandibles to excavate nests in broken stems. And this is a leafcutter bee. They're one of my favorites. They nest in cavities. They have large mandibles, and they cut pieces of leaves and flower petals to line their nests. And they carry their pollen on their abdomen. You can kind of see it in this picture. All right, wasps. Wasps, if you didn't know, are very beneficial insects. A lot of people are scared of them, but many adult wasp species are pollinators, and most of them are predatory and feed on other insects. They feed these other insects to their larvae, so therefore they prey on pest species, which is very helpful. So basically, they paralyze their prey with their sting. They take them to their nest where they lay an egg, and then the larvae will feed on those paralyzed insects. There's also the parasitoid wasps, which is like the braconid wasp that I showed you before, like with the coming out of the hornworm. So those are another type of wasp too. So they're good pest control. So here we have, it's called the stink bug wasp. They use stink bugs to feed their nymphs and to provision their nests. There's cuckoo wasps, again, same deal as the cuckoo bees. They lay eggs in nests of other wasps, and then the larvae will hatch and eat the host's food, basically, and probably the larvae itself. This is a scolid wasp. It nests in the ground. It actually used Japanese beetles to feed its larvae. So again, good pest control. A humpbacked bee wolf. You might have guessed provisions its nest with bees. And northern paper wasps. I'm sure people have heard of paper wasps. This is actually a native species, the northern paper wasp. They actually build their nest shaped like upside down umbrellas with open cells that can be seen from below. The northern paper wasp is a native species, but the European paper wasp, which is this, is not. It's an invasive species. So this is basically what a paper wasp nest look like, even invasive or not. And then you have an eastern yellow jacket. So this is another social wasp. They nest in the ground. Most of the time, yellow jackets are those annoying insects that bother you at your picnic, but they're also beneficial insects. The eastern one is native, and then there's also the German. There's some other ones, but the German one is a lot. We encounter a lot, and that one is an invasive species. Butterflies and moths. So there's so many different kinds of butterflies and moths. There's the eastern tailed blue. They all have different host plants. These ones use legumes. Pearl crescents use asters. Red-banded hair streaks. They have sumacs and oaks are their host plants. Silver-spotted skippers use honey locusts and other legumes. Dun skippers use sedges. Horace's dusky wing uses it uses oaks. I told you oaks are a very important species. There's so many species that use it as a host plant. The eastern tiger swallowtail, it's uses different tree species, tulip trees, magnolia trees, cherry trees. And then there's some cool day-flying moths. So the squash vine borer moth is a day-flying moth. It's actually, their larvae are actually pests on squash, but the adults are really beautiful and pollinators. And then you have the Nessa sphinx moth, which is another day-flying moth, and its host plants are in the grape family. So flies and beetles. If you didn't know flies and beetles were pollinators, they are. And actually, hoverflies are pretty good pollinators. So, and a lot of them are wasp and bee mimics. You can see a lot of these pictures. They have colors that look similar to wasps and bees, so they can mimic them and hopefully keep predators away. Here we have a transverse banded flower fly. These ones have larvae that eat aphids. Thick-headed flies lay their eggs on bumblebees, and then the larvae grow inside, and just like the braconid wasp. This is an eastern hornet fly, which is a really good mimic. If you don't look closely, you don't realize that this is a fly and not a hornet of some sort. And these larvae develop in rotting wood. This is a bee fly, and they hover in the air over ground bee nests. They flick their eggs in the bee nests, and then their larvae will eat the bee provisions in the nest of the nectar and pollen. This is our Narcissus bulb fly. It's actually not native. And if you're familiar with what Narcissus is, it's daffodils. So they eat daffodil bulbs. This is another aphid-eating fly. And then we have a margin leatherwing beetle. The adults feed on pollen, but their larvae actually feed underground in the soil on leaf litter and insects. And then this is a locust borer beetle. So the larvae are actually pests of black and honey locust trees, but the adults are beautiful. So I hope you enjoy learning a little bit about diverse insect pollinators that we have in our area. Okay, so the pollinator pledge. The town created a pledge for anyone who manages a landscape to commit to actions to protect pollinators. These actions include planting native plants, which we've discussed a lot, removing invasive species, which are those that are not native and can cause harm in the environment. These plants will outcompete native plants, and they are not beneficial to native pollinators or other wildlife either. Another action is reducing or eliminating pesticide use. Pesticides include herbicides, insecticides, fungicides. Our use of chemicals like insecticides hurt pollinator populations as well as other beneficial insects. And really only 2% of insects are considered pests. So you can help by allowing some damage on your plants from insects. It means they're using your habitat. And then allow the predatory insects to do the work. If the damage from insects is too severe, you may be able to pick off the pest insects. Please use chemicals as a last resort and look for organic and low toxicity insecticides. And you please use them selectively, like don't spray them everywhere. And then also be aware that spraying for mosquitoes can kill other insects, including pollinators, and may harm birds, which eat them as well. The best way you can get rid of mosquitoes is to remove any standing water. So like in bird baths, clogged gutters, buckets, fountains. And if you can't remove the water for some reason, there are these things called mosquito dunks, which you can put in the water. They're selective and only kill mosquito larvae, and they're not supposed to harm any other animals. And then herbicides have also been shown to have negative effects on insect health as well as fungicides. So be careful with those as well. And another action in the pledge is participating in community science. So there's many projects out there going on where you can provide helpful information to research on pollinators. And I'll provide, a lot of these things have links, and I'll provide those at the end. So please take the pledge, share it widely so we can get more involved with helping pollinators in our environment. So just a quick word about invasive species. This shows some common invasive plants on Long Island. Some notable ones that are often found in gardens are burning bush, Japanese barberry, and butterfly bush. The tree of heaven is the preferred host plant for the spotted lanternfly that I'm sure most of you are familiar with at this point. So removal of invasive species is very important. And we have more information on our website here. So now we're going to discuss another need of water. It's important for wildlife. Some ways you can put water in your yard is by having a bird bath, making sure you keep those clean regularly, and possibly using a fountain to keep the water moving so that mosquitoes don't lay eggs in it. You could provide a shallow puddling dish filled with rocks, stones, or sand and water. That would be something like this. It can provide minerals for butterflies. You can make a pond if you want to go for something bigger. It helps to attract dragonflies to your yard. And if you live near a water source, that's really helpful. You can you just have that water source near you that can provide for wildlife, and you don't have to actually put it in your own yard. All right, so now I'm going to pass it over to Bonnie, who's going to discuss how to protect our water resources.
Okay, thank you, Megan. So Megan spoke about water for wildlife. We're going to talk a little bit about water for people. Long Island gets all of its potable water, including drinking water, from underground aquifers, and you can see that in this picture. I can't control the red light like Megan has, but it's on your left side.
I'm trying to highlight.
That's okay. We often overpump this water during the summer months for irrigation, which everyone's going to start turning on their irrigation systems very shortly. And that puts a strain on the aquifer and pulls pollutants deeper and deeper into this aquifer, having to pump water from deeper layers to get cleaner water. It also causes saltwater intrusion from all these adjacent bodies of water. So we live on the top of these aquifers. It's important to be mindful of what we're putting into the ground or on the ground that goes into the ground. Water coming off of our roofs, streets, and lawns can transport pesticides, fertilizers, oil, and other pollutants into the storm drains and right into our local bays and estuaries. These pollutants can also seep underground into the aquifers. So many of our local bays and harbors are already plagued by these nitrogen pollution, coming in part from fertilizers and other sources, which causes algae blooms and eventually dead zones and fish kills. So how can we help in our yards? Well, one way we already discussed is planting native plants. Reducing lawns can help, and planting these native plants, because native plants don't need supplemental water. They absorb and filter out polluted stormwater. They don't need fertilizer and save water because lawns can be sometimes water intensive. Next. Okay, so saving water. We can save water by using rain barrels. A rain barrel is a container that it's about 50 gallons. Most of the ones that you see are about 50 gallons that collect rainwater from the roof of a building to use for irrigation. sometimes you can use these freestanding as well. I have in some community gardens, I've used them freestanding. It has many benefits, like reducing the demand on the existing water supply, reduces the stormwater pollution. It saves money on our potable water. It's good for the plants. Rainwater is said to have to be better for plants than tap water because it doesn't have chlorine in it. And they all should have a screen for the mosquitoes. They usually all come with a screen on the top for mosquitoes and debris. But it also allows the water to flow in. There's usually a spigot on the bottom of it, an overflow spout or a hose. So if the barrel fills up, the water doesn't go into your house or into your foundation. The water you catch in your rain barrel should not be consumed by humans or pests and should only be used for irrigation. We try to tell everyone to use caution when using the water coming from rooftops to the vegetable gardens because you don't know what the rooftops are made of. There could be chemicals, they may leach from the roof, and well as they could be bacteria from bird droppings. So you have to use your judgment on that, what's best for you. Next. Okay. Efficient hoses, saving water. So you can use water efficient irrigation to increase water conservation by using a soaker hose, which has small hose throughout, or drip irrigation, which is like a tubing with holes spaced evenly. Water will go directly to the roots and won't evaporate, unlike sprinklers that spray water into the air, so you lose water. With a lot of sprinklers. Soaker hoses and drip irrigation lines can also be hooked up to your rain barrel, and I've done that to provide water to a nearby garden. You can just attach it to the rain barrel, turn on that hose, and then it drips into your garden. Next, automatic sprinklers. So another way we can save water is by regulating our automatic sprinkler system. Automatic sprinklers should be equipped with a soil moisture sensor or a rain sensor. So you're not watering when it's raining or when the soil has enough water. I've seen that numerous times where it poured all night long. It's still pouring in the morning, and I'm driving to work and I see the sprinklers on while it's pouring outside. Smart irrigation controllers connect to irrigation systems and turns the system on and off by monitoring the weather. And it can connect to rain and soil moisture sensors as well. The Port Washington Water District offers a $150 rebate for the purchase of these smart irrigation controllers for residents. So if you're a resident of Port Washington, you would get a rebate. Using WaterSense labeled irrigation controllers will also help to save on water. There's another way to save water by using a WaterSense sprinkler spray. The body is the exterior shell that connects to your irrigation system piping and houses the spray nozzle that applies the water. The WaterSense spray body reduces unneeded water pressure and provides uniform distribution. And there's a picture of that right in this slide to the right, the bottom of the right. Oh, there it is. Yeah, top right there. Excessive pressure in other spray bars can lead to misting, foggers, and uneven coverage. So proper maintenance really is a key. Make sure your sprinkler heads are directed towards the plants and not towards the sidewalk. You see that often as well. Check for leaks in hoses and for broken sprinkler heads, and winterize by emptying the system of water and turning it off for the season. Another way to save water is to mulch. Using mulch limits evaporation, and it has added benefits of suppressing weeds. There are many types that you can use. You can see right here in this picture. Mulch helps to suppress weeds. It's a natural alternative to using an herbicide like a pre-emergent in the soil. For trees, just don't volcano mulch because it causes the mulch to be on the tree trunk where it gets too much moisture and it gets trapped around the roots and it leads to fungus and it leads to rot. That's a great picture of volcano mulching. A lot of times you see that. And just so if you do have it that way, just pull the mulch away from the base of the tree. You should see a little skirting of the tree. And trees need about 2 to 3 inches, I would say, of mulch. Perennials, maybe 1 to 2 inches of mulch, not much more than that. Another way protecting our water is with rain gardens. In this picture, this is Clark on the left, picture of Clark's rain garden. Rain gardens are shallow depressions in the landscape that are used to capture stormwater from a gutter, downspout or slope area. That's what we have. We had a sloped area at Clark. And you can see on the right side, you can see the bowl shape, and that captures the water. Rain gardens have many benefits. Pollution reduction, they filter the stormwater runoff. The aquifer replenishment, water seeps into the ground, which helps to recharge the groundwater. And that's great because when we have wells also on Clark's property, so the water just goes right back into the well and we reuse the same water. And then wildlife habitat, a rain garden uses native plants, which, as we know, have many benefits for our local wildlife, as Megan has told us about. Learn more about rain gardens and from a recording workshop taught by Rusty Schmidt. We have that on our town website, and this can be found on the same webpage as what you signed up for this workshop.
Thank you, Bonnie. All right, so talk about another need of in our yards is cover. Wildlife needs it. They need places to rest, especially during bad weather. They need it to hide from predators. Predators also need to cover to hide from their prey before they hunt. Ways we could do this are by, again, using native shrubs, trees, and grasses. And these are especially helpful in dense plantings to maximize cover. So like evergreen plants are great. Even grasses like this switchgrass in the picture do a great job. And especially when you leave these stalks up in the fall and winter too. If you cut everything back, that kind of takes away the cover. Leaving the leaves provides cover and insulation for many overwintering insects like butterflies, beetles, bees, and moths. So they're really important to have in your yards. Don't get rid of all your leaves, please. Old logs, dead tree trunks, or snags and brush piles all provide great cover for insects and birds. And although lighting isn't cover, it can affect an animal's surroundings. Artificial light, especially at night, can cause wildlife to change their normal behavior. So this light interferes with migratory birds, amphibians, and insects. For example, it can interfere with firefly mating since they use light to communicate. To help reduce outdoor lighting, you can get light fixtures where no light is visible from above, or use yellow or red LED bulbs, which are less attractive to insects. You could also use motion sensors, so lights aren't on all the time and just go on when something is going on out there. So human benefits of providing cover include beauty of the native plants, of course. Things like logs and snags have an interesting look. You could even make some chairs out of old logs, like in this picture. Wildlife using our yards is obviously a benefit. Leaving the leaves also provides mulch in our garden beds, and the breakdown adds nutrients to the soil. And as mulch, they also help prevent weeds. And then you can also think sustainably about when you create shelter for ourselves and our belongings, like when building a shed, a garage, or other structures. So we can use sustainable products like recycled materials and focus on reducing and reusing materials when creating those structures. And the last need to discuss is places to raise young for wildlife. These will be provided, again, you guessed it, by native plants. So native host plants will, again, are specific plants that larvae of butterflies, moths, and even other insects like beetles use. So you can see this picture of the monarch butterfly laying an egg on this is swamp milkweed. Water obviously provides places for frogs, salamanders, dragonflies, damselflies, and other insects to reproduce. Trees are nesting grounds for birds and squirrels. And cavities, which also includes trees, provide bees and wasps nesting habitat as well, because they'll nest in the holes in trees or in hollow stems. In the lower right, you can see a leafcutter bee using a hole as in a log as nesting space. And then carpenter bees. This is actually a small carpenter bee. I think I showed you that before, but this is what they would create a nest in a very small stem. So I spoke about leaving perennial plants up in the fall and winter for cover. And if you cut them back in the early spring to about 8 to 12 inches in height, they provide solitary bees with nesting habitat. So once the stem is cut, it gives an opening for the bee to come and make a nest in it. And then bare ground is also important nesting space for many types of bees, wasps, and beetles, and other insects. And you can see in this top right photo, this is a mining bee at her nest entrance, because 70% of all bee species nest in the ground. And also many overwinter underground, like future bumblebee queens. So again, we gain from providing all these resources for wildlife, and we get all the benefits from native plants, like their beauty, having increased wildlife diversity, and everything else we discussed about all the native plant benefits in our yards. All right, resources. So I talked about a bunch of different web pages throughout. So a lot of this information is on the main town sustainability page. We have a native plants page, a pollinator page, and one dedicated to invasive species. So check those out for some more detailed information. There's information on WaterSense here. The town is a partner of WaterSense. It's an EPA program, and we promote there are different products which help people save water, as well as tips for helping to save water in our homes and our landscapes. National Wildlife Federation has a great native plant finder. The Xerces Society has great information on gardening for pollinators. Here's the Community Science Projects page if you want to do some research in your own backyard and help some researchers out. And then the Long Island Native Plant Initiative. All right, so that's it. We're at 8 o'clock, but I will definitely stay on for questions. Again, this is, if you have to go, that's okay. This is being recorded, so you can always get the answers to questions. But before we take questions, I just want to say thanks everyone so much for joining us tonight. We hope you learned a lot, and we'll hopefully try to maintain your gardens with the needs of wildlife and humans in mind. So now let me go to the Q&A. You can still continue to add your questions in there. All right, so let's see. Since native plants, unlike long grass, grows pretty tall, what risks of tick and tick-borne disease do native plants bring to both humans and our pets? I guess there's a chance that there could be more ticks in these areas, but I think as long as you are not just traipsing around in there the whole time and making sure you're checking after you go and do anything in these gardens, you can also keep them off to, the side where your pets won't be traipsing in them as well. Bonnie, do you have anything to add about this?
Well, I know we're doing, I think, a tick count, and I think Clark is part of that, and we don't really seem to have, I should knock on wood a bunch of times, ticks at Clark Garden. So I guess in Suffolk, there's just a lot more ticks, and in other areas there are. I just haven't seen it in native plant groupings that we have in the gardens that we have. I haven't had
Yeah.
ticks on me, and we're in them all the time.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, I just from personal experience, as you can see from my yard that I showed you, I always check after I go in and do any kind of maintenance in there, and I've never gotten a tick in my yard. I mean, it's not to say that you
yeah.
can't, but
No, it's a good question. That's a very good question.
yeah,
Maybe I'll
I'm
research. I'll
sure
ask the
there's
tick
probably
specialist.
research out there.
Yeah.
How do the lawns now flower garden look in winter, and what about weeding needs? I'm assuming that's about my yard. I think they look great. I love the way that, like, I have some native grasses and even like the seed heads, they look really pretty in the fall and the winter. After the snow, some of them kind of got like knocked down, so I did cut a little back just so they would be a little neater in the front yard. The backyard, I don't really care. Nobody's looking at it besides me, and I don't think things need to be that neat. So, weeding needs, I plant very densely, so I don't have to weed very much. Every 2 weeks, I'll go out there and just make sure there's nothing crazy and maybe weed for like a half an hour, not even. But I do have a lot of space. So if you have one small garden, I'm sure it wouldn't take you that long. Someone said, will we receive this recording? I will try to send an email out once I have the link to it. Lantern bugs, I'm assuming they mean spotted lanternflies. How do we get rid of them, or do the birds eat them? That's a good question. I don't know if anybody knows how to get rid of them now. They've kind of taken over. Luckily, they're more of a nuisance as of now. They're not really like killing our plants or trees at the moment. Maybe if you have farms, it might be more of an issue. So far, I've seen some at Clark. I usually just kill them if I see them, but I saw one at my house. I live in East Meadow, so
Yeah,
um,
I don't think our birds are eating them because they're an invasive species. I know our vineyards are at risk out east because they love the grapes.
yeah,
So when you see a whole bunch of them on a tree, I think they're saying that if you could hose them all down and maybe that sort of kills them, you want to take care of the eggs. And that comes in May. In May, you see white groupings of nests, and that's easier to kill than the eggs, the larva, than the lantern bug. So if you kill the eggs, you're gonna reduce the population.
yeah, yeah. I have not seen an egg mass, so I have not had the opportunity to. They say you just should scrape it
Yeah,
off and put it in soapy water to kill them.
yeah,
But I do
yeah,
think they're somewhat camouflaged, so it might not be as easy as you think to find them. But they also do lay their eggs on other like weird structures, like people said
yeah,
they've laid them on cars and benches and things. So those ones might be easier to find than if they're on a tree, that if you see them, get rid of them.
yeah.
All right. I don't see any more questions. So I'm going to thank everyone again. Thank you so much, Bonnie. And
Thank you.
enjoy this spring. Maybe plant some native plants. Keep a lookout for our native plant rebate program. And thanks again. Have a
Thank
good
you,
night,
everyone.
everyone.